Tonight, capturing a fugitive, the dramatic end of a massive manhunt in the U.S. for an escaped killer. The tense takedown and the police dog being hailed a hero.
The dog subdued him.
Back in custody after a brazen prison break. 2,000 homes promised, but millions more still needed.
This today is the first announcement around the housing accelerator.
The Prime Minister under pressure to combat Canada's housing crisis. Plus, a BC man gets a traffic ticket after getting out of the shower.
As I open the door to the bathroom, I'm standing there face to face with a police officer.
The lawsuit over the RCMP's unusual tactic.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. A convicted killer who stabbed his girlfriend 38 times in front of her two children and climbed out of a Pennsylvania prison is back behind bars tonight in maximum security.
Our nightmare is finally over and the good guys won.
As Danilo Cavalcante tried to crawl away with a stolen rifle, a hero police dog identified as Yoda took him down. The big break coming overnight when aircraft from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency picked up thermal imaging, but had to fly back due to severe weather, prompting tactical teams to close in and secure the perimeter. CTV's Joy Malbin on the dramatic arrest of a murderer who can now add the charge of felony escape to his notorious rap sheet.
This is the moment. Helicopter video shows convicted killer Danilo Cavalcante caught and handcuffed by police.
We're proud to announce the subject is in custody.
Heavily armed officers stopped to pose with their prisoner, drawing some criticism. But after terrorizing a Philadelphia suburb for weeks, armed with a stolen rifle, officials say they're proud. This massive manhunt ended with no shots fired.
Thank God there were no injuries to law enforcement or to the public.
Cavalcante's stunning escape, crawling up that prison wall like Spider-Man, captivated the country. There were sightings, yet somehow he evaded hundreds of police officers in pursuit.
Heat signature on the north side of the wood line, going into the woods.
Police were drawn to a wooded area by a burglar alarm last night. Surveillance aircraft picked up heat signals, and that's when tactical teams moved in.
They were able to move in very quietly. They had the element of surprise. Cavalcante did not realize he was surrounded until that had occurred. That did not stop him from trying to escape.
Crawling through the thick brush with that stolen rifle, police search dogs sniffed him out. And this one, a dog named Yoda, took him down.
The dog subdued him, and team members from both of those teams immediately moved in. He continued to resist, but was forcibly taken into custody.
Convicted of brutally stabbing his girlfriend to death in front of her children tonight, her family and an entire community is relieved.
They were shrieking with joy and happiness that he's incarcerated. They have lived their own personal nightmare. I can't underscore enough the trauma that this family sustained.
The convicted killer will face an additional charge for the escape, and to make sure it doesn't happen again, Cavalcante will serve out his life sentence at a maximum security state prison. Omar?
All right, Joy, thank you. Health officials in Calgary are optimistic they may have finally turned a corner after a massive E. coli outbreak at daycares, despite the number of cases going up. CTV's Alberta Bureau Chief Bill Fortier explains.
A significant jump today in the number of E. coli infection cases linked to a daycare outbreak. 310 today compared to 264 yesterday. But the number of children in hospital is down. So is the number of kids battling the most serious complication, hemolytic uremic syndrome, or HUS.
Clinically in the eMERGE, we're seeing significant decrease in the number of children.
And doctors say the worst of the outbreak may be in the past.
We should have been through really the largest hump now.
Health officials believe the outbreak came from the kitchen of a catering company that supplied food to childcare facilities. While the daycares have the all clear to reopen, and some are, the kitchen is still closed and under investigation.
We've lost complete trust in them.
Brittany Chapman's 3-year-old daughter Taylor is one of the kids who became sick. She hopes a proposed class action lawsuit gets the answers she says haven't come from her daycare or the kitchen, which have the same owners.
They never at any point have actually issued any kind of an apology or reached out to families.
There are still 7 children receiving dialysis, a treatment for kidney failure. But doctors are optimistic.
Thankfully, the kids are doing well, and our aim is that they'll be coming off dialysis and not needing further care.
As far as these daily jumps in cases, doctors explain all children at daycares and their families were tested. Some of those tests are coming back positive, even though the adults and children are not sick. Omar.
All right, Bill, thanks. Grief and anxiety are colliding tonight in a small northern Newfoundland village where 2 fishermen are dead, and the search continues for a third. Coast Guard boats and helicopters have been scouring the area around Fleur de Lis since a small boat carrying 4 harvesters sank Tuesday afternoon. 1 man was rescued and the bodies of 2 others were recovered.
We'll do whatever we can for the community to get through this, but the only thing that's going to help is time.
The RCMP, Transport Canada, and provincial workplace health and safety officials are all investigating. Atlantic Canadians are bracing for what could be a wicked weather weekend as Hurricane Lee threatens to make an earlier and windier landing than first expected. Lee, currently a Category 2 hurricane, is churning in the Atlantic near Bermuda, but expected to barrel into the Maritimes as a tropical storm by Saturday.
Everybody is starting to batten down the hatches here now.
Of particular concern, vulnerable low-lying lands around the Bay of Fundy in western Nova Scotia and southern New Brunswick, an area already battered by coastal erosion.
It is not a full moon, and that's a good thing because the tides are much higher when the moon is full, and that puts us at risk of flooding.
The mayor of Amherst says if the area does flood, as much as a third of his town could end up underwater. CTV Atlantic's chief meteorologist Kaylin Mitchell is tracking the storm. Kaylin, as we saw from Fiona last September, even as a tropical storm, Lee could cause considerable damage. Walk us through the path.
Thank you, Omar. Well, Lee came down to a Category 2 hurricane today. There was a little bit of movement east to west in the track around the Maritimes, but not enough to really change the overall weather impacts expected from this storm system. The latest forecast track has Lee coming down from a Category 2 to a Category 1 as it moves past Bermuda, approaching the southern waters of the Maritimes as a Category 1 hurricane Saturday morning, though by that point in time, there will be a good portion of the region that is already into the rain and the wind because of the size the storm system is going to be. In fact, as we take a look at the probability of parts of the Maritimes experiencing tropical storm force winds, we can see that is quite high for Saturday around the southwest of New Brunswick and the southwest of Nova Scotia. That would be a 2-second sustained wind of 63 kilometers per hour with stronger gusts certainly possible. It is going to give us a risk of seeing some power outages. There will also be a rough and pounding surf, and those water levels are going to need to be watched at high tide times through the weekend. Omar.
All right, we'll certainly be tracking this. Kaylin, thank you. People are starting to return to a town in the Northwest Territories more than a month after they were forced out because of wildfires.
I packed up a suitcase really quick, forgot half the stuff I really needed, and was on the road.
Paulette Brocard hasn't been home to Hay River in almost 5 weeks, so she welcomed the news that essential workers have started returning and that town council will meet on Friday to decide on whether to give everyone else the thumbs up.
Fingers crossed, and the way it's looking, we're bringing home people sooner rather than later.
An evacuation alert remains in effect, so anyone returning may have to leave again on short notice. The devastating aftermath of Storm Daniel in Libya has spiraled into a deeper humanitarian disaster. The death toll is now more than 8,000, and more than 30,000 people have been displaced. Here's CTV's Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin on the heartbreaking discoveries.
Search crews in the hard-hit port city of Derna combed the mud and debris for survivors. Mediterranean storm Daniel swept away a quarter of the city on Sunday, and emergency crews have since retrieved body after body, many from the sea. Generations of families killed. I've lost 6 people, he says. In a village in neighboring Egypt, a mass funeral was held. 74 of the dead were from this town working in Libya, including this man's son and nephew. In Derna, despair is growing among those who were powerless to save others. This health worker was just asked how many were dead. Red Crescent volunteers pulled a child's body from the rubble. His father insisted on helping carry his son to bury him. The worst of the damage came after 2 dams up in the mountains above Derna collapsed. 7-meter-high waves washed through the city center. Critics have blamed officials, saying crumbling infrastructure contributed to the death toll. This after more than a decade of deep political divisions in Libya since a NATO-backed uprising that toppled longtime ruler Muammar Gaddafi. And while some have warned that could hamper recovery and relief efforts, others are hopeful.
One good thing happened now. All Libyans gather together regardless where they're from, east or west.
Mohamed Al-Zriga now lives in Halifax. His extended family is in Derna. He hopes that initial unity in the face of tragedy will last, and he says Canada should help.
Canada has a big experience in disasters, dealing with disasters all the time.
International aid is landing in Libya. Much is needed, but collapsed roads are slowing efforts. And the World Health Organization is now saying these epic floods have affected more than 1.8 million people. Geneviève Beauchemin, CTV News, Montreal.
There was another aftershock in the disaster zone in Morocco today as relief efforts intensified. New drone images from a town south of Marrakesh show what villagers and authorities are up against. Nearly 3,000 people were killed in last Friday's quake. Ottawa pledged $5 million in humanitarian assistance today. $3 million of that will be used to match donations made to the Canadian Red Cross. North Korea's leader vowed, quote, unconditional support for Russia today after meeting Vladimir Putin for more than 4 hours. CTV's Heather Butts on the high-level talks and the growing suspicions from Western countries.
Kim Jong-un meeting Vladimir Putin with a lengthy handshake and smiles. It has been 4 years since Kim ventured outside North Korea to meet with the Russian president.
This was really theatrical on both of their parts. It looked like 2 really desperate guys trying to show the world that, you know, they still counted and are you know, buddies, for lack of a better expression.
A deliberate display of support between 2 countries that are increasingly isolated, though it does come with an added fear factor. Each has something the other wants, a possible exchange of weapons and technology, which would make both more lethal than they already are. Touring Russia's most modern space rocket launch site in the Far East, evidence of how the country could help North Korea. The dictator has a desire to boost his own space program, making it a top priority to launch a spy satellite and step up the development of ballistic missiles.
Any arrangement that would improve North Korea's military capabilities would be certainly would be of significant concern to us.
Referring to the Russian leader as Comrade Putin, Kim called his war in Ukraine a sacred fight. A deal involving weapons is likely, say analysts.
It's desperate because the war has gone very poorly and they need weapons fast. And even a country with Russia's, you know, considerable industrial might is not producing enough conventional weapons for that war.
They are united in their hostility towards the West, which is watching closely.
We will continue to identify, expose, and counter Russia's attempts to acquire military equipment from the DPRK.
Kim Jong-un is expected to visit 2 more military facilities before heading home. During their meeting, he invited the Russian president to visit his country. And tonight, state media inside North Korea says Putin has accepted. Omar.
A relationship the world is watching. Heather, thanks. London, Ontario has become the first city in this country to reach a housing deal with the federal government. The funding will see some new homes built, but won't close the massive gap between what's planned and the millions of units still needed. The cost of buying and renting keeps soaring, and so does the pressure on the Prime Minister. Here's CTV's Judy Trin.
So you've got a lot of jobs on the go these days?
London's mayor gave the Prime Minister a preview of how the city is tackling the housing crisis. It's cutting red tape, increasing density, and building near transit hubs, a strategy Ottawa supports.
2 studio units?
London is the first municipality to get money from the government's $4 billion Housing Accelerator Fund.
I want to challenge other mayors right across the country to step up with their proposals, too.
so we can get building more homes, increasing supply, and lowering the prices for families.
London gets $74 million to build more faster.
This $74 million investment will fast-track the creation of over 2,000 additional housing units over the next 3 years.
But the Accelerator Fund has been on the books since the spring of 2022. Despite a worsening crisis, it has taken more than 18 months for the Liberals to roll out this small portion of money.
Every application that I can find that is worthy of funding, I'm trying to see if we can get to an approval as soon as this fall.
The frustration of millions of Canadians left out of the housing market fueled support for the Conservatives, forcing the government to act.
The competition between these two parties right now will drive better policy. It will drive them to actually have to compete more to show that they actually have the answers.
But building enough houses to match demand is still years away. Little comfort to Canadians reeling from high costs of food, gas, and rent.
Last month I had to move back in with my parents because I cannot afford to pay rent.
Today's announcement spurs the construction of 2,000 new homes in just one city. But a national housing report indicates that Canada needs 3.5 million new homes to be built by the end of the decade to restore affordability. Omar.
All right, Judy, thank you. After the break, furious with the Mounties.
The police took it upon themselves to enter my residence.
A BC man gets served a traffic ticket right after a shower. Plus, the skepticism after an out-of-this-world claim in Mexico. The British Army is confirming one of its soldiers is on trial for killing a man in Canada. British media say this is Corporal Craig Gibson, who has been charged with second-degree murder. He was arrested in downtown Toronto last month when police say they responded to calls of an assault. He's accused of killing 38-year-old Brett Sheffield from Manitoba, who later died in hospital. A British Columbia man is suing the RCMP, alleging officers entered his home while he was showering to serve him a traffic ticket. CTV's BC Bureau Chief Melanie Nagy on the man accusing the Mounties of going too far.
After taking a shower before heading to work,
Step out onto the mat.
Kirk Forbes got quite a fright.
When I opened the bathroom door, bang, right there, I'm face to face with an intruder in my house.
Not just one, but two strangers in his home, uninvited, unannounced, and unnervingly, both were RCMP officers.
The police took it upon themselves to enter my residence and basically accosted me while I was naked.
The married father of two quickly went from a state of shock to serious concern.
There's no warrants out for my arrest. What were they doing in my house? Did something happen to the kids? Did something happen to my wife?
The answer to his questions, a traffic violation ticket from 2021. Forbes says that's what the female officer standing outside his bathroom allegedly told him.
I grabbed a towel, threw on some clothes, and as I was coming down the hall, I noticed there's another police officer. It's such a gross overreach, an abuse of power.
Forbes has now filed a lawsuit against the RCMP, not only alleging an abuse of authority, but unlawful entry resulting in humiliation and distress.
Two RCMP officers ended up entering his home without authorization, consent, his knowledge, or a judicially authorized search warrant.
The Mounties say they're aware of Forbes' lawsuit and in a statement confirmed the officers attended a residence to serve a violation ticket, but they also say the home was an insecure premise.
In a very flippant, disrespectful way, they said, oh, we knocked on the door and the door flung open. That still doesn't give you the right to enter my home.
As for Forbes, in addition to the lawsuit, he's also challenging the traffic ticket. Melanie Nagy, CTV News, Vancouver.
Still ahead, the trip of a lifetime at a standstill. A cruise ship runs aground in Greenland with hundreds on board. Tonight, more than 200 passengers of a luxury cruise liner are grounded off Greenland. This Norwegian ship has been stuck in mud since Monday. A fishing trawler tried and failed to free it at high tide, and the closest Danish vessel won't be there before Friday. The Australian company that operates the ship says everyone is safe as media there are reporting possible cases of COVID on board. And before we go to break, we want to show you a photo on board a plane. The toddler to the right, Reuben Flowers, looking with admiration at his dad, a pilot. Determined to recreate the moment, the two posed for the same photo nearly 30 years later, except this time the son was the co-pilot on his father's final flight before retirement. What a precious moment. After the break, close encounters of the dubious kind, unearthing the truth about two alleged alien mummies. We leave you tonight with a mummified mystery behind an otherworldly claim. A pair of alleged alien bodies was unveiled to Earthlings today. CTV's John Venevali-Rao on the universal skepticism.
Oh my gosh, dude. Of late, fans of UFOs have had something of a moment, with several investigations underway. Even the U.S. Congress,
so help you God,
recently heard from a former military intelligence officer who actually claimed America has dead aliens.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to.
But now Mexico's Congress is taking things to a whole other level, showing the remains of what certainly looks like tiny aliens, with elongated heads and 3 fingers on each hand. Controversial UFO researcher Jaime Maussan presented them and said it's a clear demonstration we're dealing with non-human specimens. The hearing was told they were found in a Peruvian mine 6 years ago and are around 1,000 years old, and were shown at Mexico's first public congressional hearing on UFOs.
ET phone home.
But before you get too excited, online many mocking the Mexican Congress for even entertaining such claims, saying it looked remarkably like the alien in the movie E.T. Skeptics also point out in 2015, Maussan made a similar claim that turned out to be the skeleton of a human child with a deformed head. And a study using a CT scan suggests the latest so-called aliens are likely an ancient mashup of animal parts, including the head of a llama, made by people 1,000 years ago, perhaps as an art expression or for religious purposes.
They're made in a way that makes them look like creatures that have never existed on Earth, and they show great craftsmanship, they show great creativity.
This all comes as NASA prepares to reveal its own findings about UFOs tomorrow and whether there's been any actual evidence of extraterrestrial visitors, which this is almost certainly not. John Venevali-Rao, CTV News, Toronto.
And that's a snapshot of this Wednesday for all of us at CTV National News. Thanks for watching. Good night, and see you tomorrow.